Pirates of the Caribbean is a franchise known for its memorable collection of villains. And in this world of pirates, the line between hero and villain often gets blurred. There are no purely good characters, even the best among them. But not all villains live up to the legends they're built on, and some fall shorter than others. And we've so far already covered the greats, Davy Jones, Cutler, Beckett, and Barbossa, outstanding original characters who left an impact, but never examined the one who was actually based on a real-life pirate from history. And that brings us to the legendary Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, the man who made the pirate name infamous through his real exploits on the high seas. And Disney chose to bring him into the franchise as a major villain in the fourth film, Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, during the quest for the Fountain of Youth. This movie is an interesting case because it was loosely based on Tim Power's novel On Stranger Tides, which featured zombies, the supernatural, and at the same time, the search for the Fountain of Youth. And one of the key figures from the novel's protagonist encountered Blackbeard himself. That connection alone encouraged Disney to adapt elements of the book, giving us this film and its new cast of characters. And this creates a new unique situation in the franchise, because almost every other major antagonist we've discussed, from the ones already mentioned to Salazar in the later films, they are all entirely fictional. Davy Jones is inspired by the seafaring legend, but he's not a historical person. Blackbeard, on the other hand, is the first and only real historical figure to go toe-to-toe with Jack Sparrow in the Pirates of the Caribbean, and quite frankly, he is actually a terrible villain. And I say this in two ways. First, in the classic sense, he's dastardly, intimidating foe who carries some of that fearsome reputation, but the second part, and more importantly for this video, he's terrible because he's not the Blackbeard you come to expect. On Stranger Tides is not quite known for being the strong pirates film many hoped for. This doesn't mean it's a bad movie overall. I'll have plenty more to say about that film as a whole in a separate video, where it's one that arguably works better as a straight adaptation on Stranger Tides than it does as a Pirates of the Caribbean entry. However, when it comes to using a real legend like Blackbeard, the film doesn't do him justice, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. The real Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, was an English pirate who terrorized the waters of the West Indies and the eastern coast of North America during the golden age of piracy. And born around 1680, little is known about his early life. He may have served as a privateer during Queen Anne's War before turning to piracy around 1716, where he rose through the ranks quickly, capturing a French slave ship, renaming it the Queen Anne's Revenge, arming it with 40 guns, making it one of the most formidable vessels of its time. His career as a pirate captain lasted about only 2 years, but in that short time, he became one of the most notable figures in maritime history. He infamously blockaded the port of Charlestown, South Carolina, holding its citizens for ransom, and used psychological warfare to amplify his fearsome image. And in 1718, he met his brutal end at the hands of the Royal Navy, where the forces killed Teach, decapitated him, and decided to hang his head from the bow as a warning. What cemented Blackbeard's legend was his terrifying appearance and theatrical tactics. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a long black beard that he braided and tied with ribbons. Before the battle, he would tug slow-burning fuses under the brim of his hat and sometimes even his beard, lighting them so that smoke billowed out around his face like a demon emerging from hell. With pistols strapped across his chest and a menacing glare, he looked more like a supernatural monster than a man. This image wasn't for show, it worked. Many enemy crews surrendered without a fight, seeing his ship or his imposing figure. Though he wasn't the most successful pirate financially, his ability to cultivate an aura of pure dread made him the archetype of the bloodthirsty buccaneer that still dominates the popular imagination today. And in On Stranger Tides, this legendary reputation precedes Blackbeard's on-screen appearance, building up as the ultimate pirate boogeyman. Characters speak of him in hushed, fearful tones, where Jack Sparrow himself describes him as Edward Teach, the pirate all pirates fear, resurrector of the dead in his spare time, and among many other things. The film does blend the historical elements with the supernatural flair, portraying him as a ruthless captain who commands not just men but dark forces. His crew includes zombie officers, and rumors swirl about his mastery of voodoo and black magic. And even before we meet him, the audience understands that crossing Blackbeard means facing something far more dangerous than an ordinary pirate lord. And Barbossa, as a privateer hunting Blackbeard for the crown, carries that personal vendetta after losing the ship and leg to him. Other characters echo that dread. Gibbs and the crew treat the mere mention of Blackbeard with a wide-eyed terror. The film uses his pre-introduction conversations to paint him as a larger-than-life figure, a man who collects defeated ships in bottles, wields a magical sword that controls vessels, and inspires mutiny out of pure fear. This build-up promises a villain worthy of the Blackbeard name, a demonic force of nature that even the most cunning pirates like Jack and Barbossa approach with caution. Because if you couldn't put the fear in those like Barbossa, then you have a real villain that is worth noting. However, once Blackbeard finally appears on screen, that legendary terror built up by other characters quickly deflates. Played by the wonderful Ian McShane, who we all know from the John Wick films, he makes a strong visual entrance, beard smoking with lit fuses, commanding presence, and a signature gravelly voice. He stops Jack's mutiny almost effortlessly using the magical sword of Triton to animate the ship's ropes, trapping the rebels and making an example of them by burning one crew member alive with Greek fire. Yet after this dramatic introduction, Blackbeard spends most of the film feeling surprisingly passive and unthreatening for someone hyped as the pirates all pirates fear. His actions often come across as mediocre rather than menacing. He relies heavily on his zombie officers and the enchanted sword for control, where we rarely see him engage in brutal pirate raids or displays of raw power. Most of his on-screen time involves him brooding in his cabin drinking or philosophizing about the suffering and faith in conversations with the missionary Philip. And while the film shows him capturing mermaids and forcing his crew into dangerous quests, the film also never shows him as a strategic mastermind or a truly sadistic force. His main motivation in this film is to find the Fountain of Youth to avoid a prophesied death at the hands of a one-legged man, making him feel reactive and almost desperate rather than dominantly evil. Even his relationship with his daughter Angelica reveals more of a flawed, selfish father than a terrifying villain. He's willing to sacrifice her for his own immortality, but this personal drama doesn't translate into a broader fear or menace for the audience. Blackbeard often delegates it to other people to do his dirty work than handling things himself. He's not portrayed as the legend as they suggest, and how it shows almost nothing to back it up. Ian McShane does bring a solid performance and menace to the screen, but those actions never match the hype. He's the ultimate backseater who lets his tools, his daughter, and his crew carry the weight of the story while he observes from the sidelines. And compare that to the other great pirate villains we've talked about: Davy Jones' tragic obsession, Cutler Beckett's cold institutional power, or Barbossa's own cunning charisma, where this version of Blackbeard lacks a memorable personal stamp or grand set piece to dominate the screen. His big confrontation at the Fountain of Youth ends with him being outmaneuvered and poisoned unceremoniously. Again, compare that to Barbossa, who fears Blackbeard in this film. In the original film, from the moment he's introduced, we see him as a cunning, ruthless leader. He commands, out of loyalty and fear through his actions, orchestrates mutinies, hunting for cursed gold, and making bold, calculated moves that drives the entire plot. Even as a cursed skeleton, he feels like a genuine pirate captain who earned his position through ambition and brutality. That same goes with Beckett and what he did with his institutional power through the East India Company, where they repeatedly proved through decisive leadership and memorable villainous deeds. Blackbeard, by contrast, never earns that same quite leading edge. Sure, he has an imposing introduction and wields the powerful sword of Triton with authority, using it to command the ship in impressive fashion, but he usually just barks orders and bullies his crew effectively through the journey to the Fountain of Youth. And that's where the menace usually stops. Instead of leading the daring raids or showcasing tactical brilliance like earlier villains, he mostly delegates the dangerous work to others, to Jack Sparrow, to his zombie officers, to his daughter Angelica, where on the island his leadership boils down to intimidation and threats to keep people in line, while the real heavy lifting happens around him. In the essence, he feels more like a powerful passenger on his own quest than a dominant pirate king who the build-up promised. Like, he doesn't even fight the mermaids or anything else, he just sits back and watches everyone deal with the action. And this lack of active villainy actually hurts his impact. Where Barbossa schemes, manipulates, and charges headfirst into conflict, Blackbeard watches from the sidelines or relies on magical shortcuts. Because the film gives him these cool supernatural tools: the zombie crew, the ship controlling sword, and ships in the bottles, but rarely lets him use them in ways that feel inventive or terrifying on a large scale. And as a result, he comes off as a bully with impressive resources than a legendary pirate lord who shapes events through sheer force of will and cunning. And this disappointment hits the hardest when you hear Barbossa's story in the film when he's captured with Jack. He recounts how Blackbeard ambushed them off of Hispaniola, took the Black Pearl with ease, and left him with a lost leg and a burning need for vengeance, as of course according to the prophecy that Blackbeard fears. It paints Blackbeard as an unstoppable force, the kind of pirate who can snatch the legendary pearl like candy from a baby. That setup builds up an image of a ruthless, overwhelming villain who dominates other captains without breaking a sweat, even the legendary Barbossa, who was the villain of the first film. But the film never delivers on that promise. We never see in this version of the film of Blackbeard that is capable of delivering such a decisive, humiliating victory. Instead, we're left with a character who feels far smaller than the legend both history and the movie tried to sell us. which is ironic because again, Blackbeard's exploits as a pirate was only 2 years. Historically and in the context of the franchise, Blackbeard should have been a monumental force, a larger-than-life terror who reshaped the seas through terror and bold action. Yet the movie's version never reaches that level, and his exit at the Fountain of Youth feels particularly unsatisfying in terms of a villain's payoff. Jack's cunning manipulation during the ritual and the heartbreaking moment with Angelica, watching her father choose himself over her, does give the scene emotional weight, whereas death in many ways does feel deserved, a fitting end for a man who lived through cruelty, selfishness, and manipulation of those closest to him as his skin is ripped off. But it doesn't carry the same epic impact a villain of his reputation should command. He simply does not go out as the monstrous force we were led to expect. Again, it's tragic in that way, but also in the other because Blackbeard was never the Blackbeard we expect. And ultimately, this villain in Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides fails to show anything truly worth of a top-tier villain's salt. This franchise has already proven it can create unforgettable antagonists who feels dangerous, active, and legendary in their own right, where this version had the name, the actor, the visuals, and the backstory, but not the substance. And the result is a frustrating missed opportunity, a terrible villain in more ways than one. And in the end, Blackbeard did not need to be this mediocre or terrible. He had all the tools to be the all-time great Pirates villain, a legendary historical name, a fearsome visual design with a smoking beard, and supernatural abilities that go beyond your imagination, with a crew of zombies and the most charismatic of actors of his generation, where the foundation was simply there for something truly special. A villain who can stand shoulder to shoulder with Davy Jones and Barbossa as they feared, but instead the film chose to treat him as part of a side piece adventure rather than giving him and the rest of the cast an epic story that would have been well deserved. On Stranger Tides feels more like it's interested in being a loose adaptation of the novel than a full-blooded Pirates of the Caribbean movie. The focus shifts largely towards this Fountain of Youth quest, the father-daughter drama, and Jack's personal antics, leaving Blackbeard as a secondary force rather than this central terror. It's a choice that wasted the potential of nearly everyone involved, including Blackbeard. This film should have been better, a grand high seas showdown worthy of the franchise's legacy and the real Blackbeard's infamous reputation. But for whatever reason, they chose not to go there. Blackbeard remains a frustrating what-if in the Pirates saga, a villain with all the right ingredients who was never allowed to truly cook. And in the end, he's terrible not only because he's evil, but mostly because he's disappointingly forgettable. I'm all done. Goodbye.